think that the speed with which you move through those progressions is predicated on two other pieces. So if you can think about it as that is like the central spoke of the ladder that you're trying to move up, the things that are kind of the staircase that wraps around it are the character traits and beliefs that you have.
All right, so here we go, guys. Welcome to a special episode here on the Healthpreneur Show. I'm very, very honored and pleased to introduce you guys. If you're not familiar with this young stallion, his name is Alex Hormozi, and honestly, guys, he is one of the sharpest, wisest guys you could have the pleasure of getting to know. Not only is he kind of at the helm of running a number of companies that do about $1.5 million per week in revenue. You may know him more famously from Gym Launch, which has really taken the world by storm since 2017, and just helping thousands of gym owners build tremendous businesses. Are you guys responsible for 37 millionaires from that alone,
60,
or probably more?
Sorry, I think it's like 71 or 72. We have like a tally counter or something like that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
71 gym owners turned into millionaires through his system. So guys, Gym Launch is just one of the things he's had his hands in. As you'll see, one of the sharpest cats when it comes to business, life. So Alex, welcome to the Healthpreneur Show.
I appreciate it. And for the audience, Yuri is one of the most gracious and complimentary hosts. So that's
Awesome, dude. Well, dude, I'm pumped because we could talk about this stuff for hours. I know we'll try to get in as much as we can in the next 30 minutes or so. I would love to start off talking about, because you've had a really cool journey from like sleeping on your gym floor and kind of being the brick and mortar guy to then helping businesses brick and mortar and then helping them online. I would love, because you talk a lot about this, like the importance of skill stacking, skill development as we grow. So for your journey, and then obviously replicated through others that you've helped, what are some of the essential skills our listeners should be aware of, whether it's from like starting out and then as the business grows to, let's say 100K, 1 million, 10 million, et cetera?
Okay. It's a really good question. So I see entrepreneurial growth, it's kind of like 3D chess, but there's kind of two different graphs, if you can picture in your mind, that I see the progression looking at. So the first and primary one is the skills, right? If you have no skills, you have no value to provide. And if we're in a capitalistic society, which most of you guys are, then we get paid based on the value we can provide. So in the beginning, we have to learn a technical skill of some sort, right? Something that solves a problem for someone else on some level. From there, the next level skills, we have to learn how to sell that technical skill. So first we are technicians, then we become salesmen. The level after that is we become managers, right? After that, we become executives and leaders. After that, we become investors, and then after that, become philosophers. And so that's kind of the trajectory. And my billionaire mentor told me then after that, it's bum. So, yeah, he said you just go full circle. But that's from the skill vertical, right? If you're thinking about where you're at right now, maybe you can identify where you're at on that ladder. But I think that the speed with which you move through those progressions is predicated on two other pieces. So if you can think about it as that is like the central spoke of the ladder that you're trying to move up. The things that are kind of the staircase that wraps around it are the character traits and beliefs that you have. And so, for example, I could say, you've learned the skill of sales, but you don't have the character trait of persistence. And so you're not able to consistently do the outreach, or you're not consistently able to do or take your sales calls in a way that you can manage your state well, et cetera. And so it's a character trait that is limiting the expression of the value that you have from the skill that you've acquired. And then all of that kind of fits within the larger staircase that's wrapping even further around, which is the beliefs that you have about the world. And one of the most difficult things, and I think one of the most valuable things that most of us as entrepreneurs can do, is getting around one of two types of people. One is when you are around people who are laterally around the same level as you, there are always things that someone else does better than you, and seeing what those things are. And if you can, I think it's nice, because if you have someone laterally and then all of a sudden they have a breakthrough, you can see like, hey, they were just like me 2 seconds ago, so like I too can do the same thing. The second type of kind of belief breaking comes from above, and that's where someone else recognizes the limiting belief in how you see the world, your perceptions, that they can recognize, and then you can break. And what's interesting, I think, is that most of us truly believe our beliefs. And so if you really believe something, then you can't see it. And that's what makes it so difficult. And that's why I think the entrepreneurial journey is one of the best vehicles for personal growth.
Yeah, totally. So what's a belief, there's probably many beliefs that you've had to kind of reshape and overcome. What do you like in your journey, at whatever level it was, what do you think was the one belief that slowed you down the most from really getting to the next level?
Man, so many. How about I share the one that's been most recent for me?
Yeah.
So we've been, and you listened to a couple things of mine, which we were stuck at mid 30 million a year for like 3 years. And I was very frustrated by that because I just couldn't, I was like, what skill, what trait, like what am I lacking, right? And the belief that I had was that it was about me. And so I always was looking at completely the wrong room of the house for this solution. And it was only after reading a book, and coincidentally, I just got to talk to the author yesterday. He does $1 billion plus a year in revenue in his business. Wow. So I was like so excited. He took my call. I have no idea why. I was very happy about it. And his book outlined the trajectory from 30 million to 100 million plus. And it was after reading that book that I think that's what unlocked us. And now we're on pace to grow to that level. And it was about finding superstars. And it's one of those difficulties where we call them singe moments in our community, where it's like something you've heard your whole life becomes real for you, right? And like some of us, we have these things that we've heard, but like it wasn't real for you. And that's why I think some of the like belief breaking happens a lot of times in proximity, because you see an example of what this looks like. And then you're like, oh, like those words that floated around my brain, this is a tangible example. This is what it means to find an A player. And so I think that like my beliefs around what talent can achieve has consistently moved up over time. So it's the same belief set of like, what can someone else do? But I remember when I've hired my first $30,000 a year salary employee, and I was like, man, this is awesome. Because I went from an hourly person to a salary person. Like, this is great. And then went from 30 to 50, and that was a huge break. I was like, wow, this person can help me so much more. And then went from 50 to 100, and I was like, whoa, like $100,000 a year employee, this is what's up. And then at 250,000, and then $500,000 a year employee, and like each of those levels like unlocked new levels of attention back to me, because these people could handle bigger and bigger workloads. And so I think the piece that I'm at now, and I'm sure this will get unlocked later for me, another level above this, but it's really getting out of the way. Well, first identifying, recruiting the talent, and then putting the proper incentives in place that incentivize them in earnest to own a compartment of the business as though it were their own. Yeah. And I think and I'll tell you, I'll share this with the audience. I think it was groundbreaking for me. When I talked to the guy who's doing $1 billion a year, I was like, okay, your book ends at 100 million. I was like, so what's the next thing, right? What's the next thing? And he said, I think the way to get to $1 billion is to not try and get to $1 billion. And I was like, ugh, okay, what?
He's at the philosopher level now, right?
Yeah, so he's totally at the philosopher level.
Because the riddles, like what?
Yeah, and so he said, we've been stuck at 4 or 5 years at 100-ish million, right? And he said it was only at that point we were so frustrated with it that we broke the company into all these tinier pieces and then kind of promoted the drivers of each of those business lines and gave them, equity stake and some profit sharing. That he's like, and then we didn't do anything. He's like, and then 5 years later we were at 500 million. And so I think that the moral of my lesson is that one person can only grow something so much. Like there's only so much juju that you can have. And I think that line exists. I mean, I think it depends on the entrepreneur, but for many people, it's around 30. And I think you've probably seen there's these caps, and I'm sure you've seen in the internet world and the different business world, like 30, 50-ish, like there's a line there. And it's because it's still driven by the soul of the founder.
That's
and
awesome.
At some point you can't be the juju behind everything. And so that was kind of the biggest unlock for us.
Yeah.
And coincidentally or ironically, we are less involved in the businesses now than we ever have been. And they're making more, which is just weird.
Amazing.
You question how meaningful you really are. And there's all these other, things that go along with it. Yeah. But that's like a belief set, right? But to pair with the original framework that we're talking about, if you could have that belief of like, okay, I need to find A players, but if you don't have the character traits of somebody who's able to attract and inspire an A player, then they're just not going to work for you. or they're going to work for you briefly and then realize they don't want to work for you. And so like, there's kind of this, everything has to move up at once. And so some people have 2 out of the 3 boxes checked for years and just can't check the 3rd box. And then they just skip 2 more levels because the other 2 boxes were checked for 2 more levels above, but their limiting factor was a trait, or it was a skill, or it was a belief. And so anyway, that's kind of how I've seen the entrepreneurial progression.
That's great. I'd love to explore the idea of the superstar for a second, because I've noticed, and I've made this mistake in the past, how does somebody know if they have a superstar versus just an A player? Because I think a lot of people think my team's amazing, I've got a bunch of A players, but they don't even know what they don't know. So other than like how much you're paying someone, how can you identify that relatively soon?
I think this is hilarious, because that was literally the next question I asked when I had my talk. So I'll tell you what he said, and then I'll just give my 2 cents on it. So what he said was, you recognize a true star. He's like, there's a superstar. He's like, there's stars and superstars. He's like, superstars are very rare. He's like, but a superstar you'll know in the first 24 hours. He said, now, here's what's interesting. It's like, you will have false positives, people who you think are superstars and are not. He's like, but I've never not thought someone was a superstar and then they became one. And I thought that was very telling, because then you can just go off the fact that if someone isn't a superstar in your mind in the first 24 hours, they're gone. And I think for me, this is a belief change. Over time, I've gone from like giving somebody a month, and then giving someone 3 weeks, and then giving someone 2 weeks. And I think that time horizon has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, because if someone is who I want them to be, or the type of person who's going to really drive something, then I will know. You know what I mean? They will make it known that they are that type of person. And then in terms of me anecdotally experiencing this, is giving someone a directive of growth and the authority to do that. So, you know, a lot of times people, there's a pairing when you're delegating, right? You have authority and you have responsibility. When you have somebody who has lots of responsibility and no authority, they get blamed, right? If you have somebody who has a lot of authority and no responsibility, they do the blaming. And so you have to balance both of those things. And so if you have the person who's empowered, has the right incentives in place, and has the directive to grow, if that person can grow their line of business without you consistently, to me, that is what a superstar is. I can say, hey, I need you to build an outbound team. And they're like, got it. And then 6 months later, we have an outbound team that does, 50% of our revenue. Like, yeah. That's what a superstar is. Is growth. And I think there's tenders and growers. This is just borrowing his terminology, but I agree with it. It's like, you've got people who maintain, and I think that's really important for more stable, bigger, older businesses. And it's wildly important. But for most people who are listening to this, you're probably not in that phase. And it's finding drivers. And drivers can be a little bit more rambunctious. They can be a little harder to deal with, a little more hard charging. But if you have the character traits and the interpersonal skills to talk and listen to those people, then you will work well with them in tandem going towards the same goal.
Yeah, that's great. And so for those who have businesses that are, let's say, cracking their first 100K or on path to, let's say, their first million, and, they don't have a budget for, 150 type of year salary, where's the balance of identifying, let's say, junior talent, coaching them up, and maybe that trade-off of like, it's going to be a little bit longer versus coming in right away and really making things happen as soon as possible? How do you find that balance for those who are a little bit earlier on in the game?
I think the issue comes down to the entrepreneur's expectations of growth. And I think the reason that we shoot ourselves in the foot is because we, for some reason, have a judgment that we cast upon ourselves from a third party that doesn't exist about how we should be growing faster, how this isn't happening the way it's supposed to. And so we cast these judgments on ourselves, and then it forces us to make bad decisions. When, if we were to look at this from like a reasonable perspective, it's like, well, last year you did 250,000. Next year you'll do 500,000. Year after that you'll do 1 million. Like, those are great growth numbers, and you go from there to 1.5 or 2 million. And is that unreasonable? And in the beginning, you're going to take more junior talent and invest in them, and it's going to be slower. And that's why most great things take time to build. And I think that the best thing to do is just start. As a corollary to that, the reason that you see some of these unicorn crazy growth companies is because many of them, at least the ones that get a lot of the media attention, they're grown in an unnatural environment. And so what I would mean by that is, if I'm a Sequoia, investors who invest in all the big software deals, and they already know and have a roster of proven superstars, and they put 5 of them together, And it wouldn't make sense to do that, but they artificially create revenue by just raising the capital for those people to live, and so what ends up happening is, if you think about this from a really fucking meta standpoint, Sequoia and the investors are the ones that are actually running the billion-dollar business, and they are finding the superstars and giving them the equity in the thing to drive and staying out of their way. And so you can look at it from the perspective of the entrepreneur who's growing this thing and there's all these A players. You can also look at it in terms of it is just one of the many business lines that exist within the larger portfolio. So even though you as the entrepreneur feel like you are in this bucket, or this is all of your universe, you actually fit within a larger universe of someone else's bucket. And so just as a fun thought experiment.
It's like the Matrix.
Right.
You've had a lot of mistakes. You openly share a lot of them on your podcast, which by the way is awesome. Check it out on iTunes, guys. It's called The Game. Really good. What is like top of mind? One of the mistakes that you keep coming back to is like, man, this was a real doozy. And what was the lesson you learned from that? How did it make you better?
I think understanding sequence is something that has been difficult for me. I, like many entrepreneurs, want things to happen faster, and I want to do all of the things. And in so doing, I take on more than I like. A saying that Layla says to me a lot is, businesses die from indigestion, not starvation. They try and do too much, not because they're not doing enough. And so this is one of those character traits, right? The discipline to say no is something that I have to continue to develop. It's probably one of my weakest links for me as an entrepreneur. And so when I started Prestige Labs, which is our supplement company, I started in 2018. And so for context, we had done 6.8 million in 2017. In 2018, we had just done 28 million in top line revenue. And it was at that point, after that tremendous growth, that I was like, let's start another company. And it was the wrong decision given my skill set at the time. And so I became CEO of two companies. And you can't really do that. And so, and I think I floundered, you know what I mean? We grew to 37 the next year, but the level of growth definitely diminished because I had to split my attention between these two things and try and be the driving growth behind both. And I also, I hired somebody who was going to be the all-star, whatever, superstar player. And I was way too patient with that person for not growing the business. And I ended up, basically that person just stayed there for a year or two, a long time. And it was because I did not recognize that independent from that person being a great person, they were not the great person for that role. And so, it's like one of those tiny little execution errors, right? Like the strategy made sense. It's like, yeah, let's start we have this distribution base. Let's solve some problems for them, make a really low cost version for what they have so they can make more money, et cetera. Like that all made sense strategically. But the faulty was in the execution, and the execution was from the people. And so I didn't have the ability at the time, or the perspective from which to make a judgment on talent the way that I do now. Not that I'm infallible, obviously. I'm just saying, like, I have more experience with it now, and I think I can recognize talent better and faster. And if someone's not the right person, I'm far more willing now to let them go. And so I think the biggest mistakes that I've had have come from holding on to people too long when on some level I knew they weren't perfect.
I can relate to that. I know a lot of people listening to this can relate as well. And there's this level of guilt where it's like, these people depend on you or the company for their livelihood. They're good people. And I was mentioning to a friend the other day, it's like, I've never been in a relationship, personally or business, that ended that didn't then attract something better afterwards. And I think these are just like the lessons of growth and doing it more and more. But it's challenging, right? It's I don't know if you'd agree with this. For me, I think one of the biggest challenges that will always get in our way is people, ourselves or other people, and being able to have those difficult conversations and get out of our own way sometimes.
Layla likes to say that the gap between where you are and where you want to go is just the number of hard conversations you're willing to have.
Yeah, 100%. Speaking of Layla, so for those of you guys who don't know, that's your wife, aka business partner. How have you been able to successfully build this amazing empire together? And what advice would you give to those who are in a business partnership, either as spouses or even just as co-founders who are not intimately together?
I have so much on this. Okay. Most people listening probably shouldn't be in business with a partner that they're in business with. Most business partnerships fail over a long enough time horizon. And it's usually one partner realizes what I'm probably going to share with you, which is if both of you have the same skill set, one of you is not needed. So what happens so many times is like, hey, I like you, you like me, we like the same stuff, let's start a business together. And that's a terrible way to start a business because you basically just cut your income in half and you have two people who do the same things. Mm-hmm. And the partnership usually has to be between people who have differing styles of operating. And so Layla and I built a very natural business partnership. We were business partners, I would say, before we were like lovers, for lack of a better term. We built our romance, but the business was something that we just naturally worked well together with. And so she's a natural integrator. She's a natural number two. She loves being right hand and managing the team, the culture, and the training, and really building the infrastructure behind the strategic idea or monetization structure that we choose to do. So it's like, well, this is the strategy. And it's like, this is a great strategy, but how's it going to come to life? And so I think that especially in small business, the strategies are, I feel like, almost the easier parts. I feel like I have the easier job. The making those things come to life, the execution is where most things fall. And I think one of the hardest parts about entrepreneurship is deciding whether the reason you are failing or not achieving what you want is because of a strategic problem or because of an execution issue. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, it's because of an execution issue. And so a lot of times we pivot, hey, maybe we should do this on the offer. Maybe we should do this as our front end. Maybe we should change our pricing like this, when in reality, it's just the onboarding sucks, right? Or your customer service is terrible, right? Or, you know what I'm saying? It's just the big obvious thing. And so to bring this full circle back around for the business partnership question, the people who I think work best together have to, right off the bat, understand the difference between a visionary and an integrator. There's tons of books on it, scaling up, traction, EOS, like all that stuff is good. I think they all kind of pretty much mimic the same concepts. But you have to have a fundamental dichotomy that is to be managed between those two extremes. It's a yin and a yang that must both coexist. And so I think that's what makes for a good partnership. And you don't have to be equity partners with your integrator. And I think that's another big mistake because people are very, very ready to give away equity. And I say this having 8 failed business partnerships. So this isn't like Alex hates partners. It's just like it took me a long time to learn this lesson.
Yeah, it's huge. I want to just kind of take a tangent for a second. Obviously, you guys can tell that Alex is pretty buff. You practice what you preach. You come from the gym world. What does your daily routine look like? Morning till nights. How do you keep it all together? Give us a walkthrough from morning till night.
I have a purposely very, very empty schedule. So if I were to share my screen, I have like lunch on my calendar, and that's really about it. That's like my only really recurring commitment is that I have lunch with Layla.
Dude, I love that. I want to just mention something about that because I think there's a lot of talk about if you don't have your calendar scheduled in like 15-minute increments. I'm the same way. I like having nothing on my calendar.
I get stressed out when I see lots of things on my calendar, and I automatically assume that I'm not going to get anything done. And so, and for anybody listening, like I would say, of all of the things that I have found is that I have entrepreneur friends who are like that. And I have entrepreneur friends who are like me, and both of them are really successful. And so what I think is the surefire way to not be successful is to try and do something that is against your natural style. I do not like that. Warren Buffett doesn't plan out his 15-minute increments. He just makes good decisions every quarter or so. You know what I mean? And so I like to give myself grace in terms of how I feel like I operate best. And usually when I have lots of time to think, I come up with better ideas, I make better decisions, and I can steer the boat the right way. That's also the season I'm in. And so not to juxtapose my season onto your season, not your season, but the people who are listening, like there were definitely times where my days have never really been super planned out, but I was still grinding 14 hours a day. And that season for me was from 2013 until December 2019. So I would say, and that was when I made the decision that I was going to change the way I was operating, because at that point we had made so much money that I realized I didn't need to make any more money. And that I then started with the question of like, what does a perfect day look like for me? And how can I live as many of those days in a row? And so a perfect day for me is I don't want anything on my calendar. And so that was like, okay, well, that's what I want. So how do I do that? And so it took probably another year and a half to put the right people. And sometimes you have to cycle through multiple, and it takes time. It's like, well, what if I pick wrong? It's like, well, you're going to eat shit for a quarter. That's what's going to happen. And you have to pick someone else. And that's why business growth is not fast for most people. So that's Alex's routine. I try to work out. I don't work out as much as anyone would really think. The level of effort to maintain muscle is very, very low. So right now I'm working out probably 3 times a week for about 30 minutes. And if you really want a head trip for the healthpreneurs who are listening, if you do the math on whether your health addiction is healthy, and I'll use healthy in quotes here, but life extending, then consider the fact that if you spend 2 hours a day, 5 days a week working out, you'll have spent 10 active waking hour years of your life, if you do that for 40 years, trying to extend your life by 3 to 5 years. And so you're probably not going to net an increase in life extension, in livable life through this thing. And so once I realized that, I changed the way that I was training, because I'm not trying to get bigger. I don't care about getting stronger. I would like to live longer. But for me to live longer, it's just, there's very little that actually has to be done. I have to walk. I have to not eat like crap. And, I do resistance training for 30 minutes 3 times a week. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's good. Love it. Let's talk about COVID's lessons learned, how it's exposed businesses, both good and bad, and how you see the future of not just gyms, but brick and mortar in general. Because I think fundamentally, we've seen a massive shift in a year that maybe took 100 years for the Industrial Revolution, 20 years for the internet to kind of leave its imprint. What do you see the future like in terms of work for gym owners, brick and mortar? Yeah.
So before anyone gets their pennies in a bunch for what I'm about to say, I could A, be wrong, B, this is over an extended time horizon, not next year. But I think I like to ask questions like, would it be reasonable to assume X, right? So would it be reasonable to assume that if we had 100%, for example, of people who were at gyms prior to COVID, that an amount greater than 0 will stay not going back to the gym? I think the answer to that question would be yes. Do I think that there's more people who will go back to the gyms than were going to the gyms beforehand? I don't think so. And so for that reason, I would say that overall, this is gym specific, then I'll go broader. Mm-hmm. I think gym specific, I think that the market overall will shrink. I think there's going to be a snapback just because there's a certain, a big wave of people that are going to come back. But that also doesn't account for the fact that 35% of gyms went out of business permanently. And so the gyms that are left will see a wave, but that accounts for the fact that 35% of those people are being reshuffled back in the marketplace. So I think that there's going to be a shrinking in supply and demand, and just the overall market of brick and mortar gyms will go down. I think that the market on health overall will go up. And so I think more people who wouldn't. So do I think it would be reasonable that more people got exposed to at-home workouts during COVID because of all the new entrants, new marketers entering those spaces and making it more convenient for people to exercise? Yes, I believe that it would be reasonable to assume that if it's more convenient for people, more people will do it. And so based on that assumption, I think that overall health and remote health will outpace, brick and mortar growth. Do I think it's going to happen, that trend is going to happen over the next 12 months? No, probably not. Do I think it's going to happen over the next 20 years? Yeah, probably. Just like Amazon, the day it came out, didn't put out all, clothing stores and all retail stores, but over a 20-year period, retail felt Amazon. And so, and Shopify and, et cetera. So I think these are just kind of bigger trends. In terms of what's going to stay alive for in-person, I think services that you have to take your body somewhere, like a dentist, hair salons, often you have to take your hair there. I mean, the mobile version is just inefficient, so it's still kind of difficult. And some people do like the experience of getting out of the house. So I think that's different than something that you have to do every single day, where the convenience is going to be a much bigger factor than like getting your haircut every 2 months or whatever. Yeah. So I think those types of businesses are going to be much more protected: chiropractors, physical therapists, et cetera, which is brick and mortar service. Brick and mortar retail, I think we all know has continued to get hammered and probably will continue to get hammered. And if you are a brick and mortar service, then you have to figure out how to create a hybrid model of some sort, which is, how can I stay in touch with my clients and create an experience that exists outside of the brick and mortar facility, and what things can I do in the brick and mortar facility that no one else can do who is an online player can match. And so that way you can, like, if you have a brick and mortar presence and you're meeting with people in person, then you should use every advantage you have of being in person as part of your strategy. If you're just doing workouts, which someone can do at home, it's going to be very difficult for you to compete. So it's like, what else can I do in person that no one else can do? And so that's kind of the line of questions that I would be asking.
Nice. All right, last question for you. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to your younger self? Let's say 20 or 25-year-old Alex.
I think about this question all the time. And I wouldn't want to alter the trajectory of my life because I really like where I'm at and I like the lessons that I've learned. There's sometimes where there's a couple big, I might have been like, hey, supplement company, like, do it, just wait another year. You know what I mean? Or like, the software company, like, don't do it until this is doing, you know what I mean? Like, I would have done maybe tactical things like that. But I think if I really, really, really were to think about it, I would just say, like, when you die, nothing's going to happen. And like, you're going to derive meaning. Like, it'd be much more philosophical. Like, you're going to derive meaning from what you learn. And so that is the point of this. The point of this is to learn. There's no other point. And so I think if I just had that, then it would just I would probably still make the same decisions. It's just that the journey would have been less filled with anxiety for me.
Awesome. Alex Hormozi, dude, this has been awesome. Best place for people to follow you online. Number one is the podcast called The Game. Anywhere else?
I have a YouTube channel that I just started. So you just Google my name and it should come up on YouTube. And I'm going to be releasing a bunch of books and courses absolutely free. Just because I just want people I believe in entrepreneurship and I believe it's the way to make the world better. So I'm going to be making really premium quality stuff that's going to be true trainings, not just concepts, but like, this is literally how you do it type stuff. So that's what I'm going to be doing on that channel. And if you like it, then tag along. Amazing.
Dude, thank you so much. Appreciate your time, your wisdom, everything you've done for the industry, for everyone even outside the industry. You're a true gem, buddy. Thanks so much.